All right, so we're recording. I've got Quinn and Brandon with me, and we're talking today about living dangerously and provocatively for the sake of the kingdom. And so first, I'd like to start just by asking both of these guys to introduce themselves. So Quinn, why don't you start?
Yeah, sure. I'm Quinn Tyler, new to Creole Collective, as in from the beginning of the summer. I am a student at Southeastern University in Florida. My major is theological studies. I grew up in a fairly conservative Christian background. Our church was more Baptist than anything. And then I gained some exposure to the charismatic movement, began to see healings happen left and right, salvations happen left and right, saw the gift of prophecy flowing left and right, all that cool charismatic stuff. And yeah, that really brought me to a whole new world that I had never seen before. And so now here I am, living a dangerous and provocative life to the best of my ability for Jesus.
Great, thanks, man.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I ran into you outside of your beach house.
Yeah, I left that part out, but
It was a real random connection, but
yeah,
awesome. Awesome. I'm glad it was orchestrated by the Spirit.
Absolutely.
So good.
God ordained moment.
Brandon, your turn.
I'm Brandon. I am also new to Creo as of like a month. Molly actually, who's on here, I had a Zoom call with her and she was like, you got to check out Creo. I am located in Los Angeles area vicinity, same town as Tracy Weaver and Jason Lee, who's also sometimes involved with Creo. I am currently still for another week and a half on staff at a church that I grew up at, been here for 18 years, and I'm currently transitioning off of staff here to look at planting a house church movement in our city, it's the last week and a half has been like super exciting. There's a number of families who want to help me, who are like very missionally minded, who want to help be a part of this and get involved. So there's a lot of exciting movement in that direction. But yeah, ultimately right now, just finishing well, which is hard to do, but I'm trying to do it. That is the quick summary of me.
Yeah, Brandon led this really incredible time of people resigning from their churches, which is something that we like to see happen in Creo. Need more resignations for the sake of the kingdom.
We're gonna do a webinar on that?
Heck yeah, man. We could just do it right now. But I think,
can I resign from parenting? Is that possible?
You have a rough day, Jeff?
Oh, we're doing good.
Okay.
We're doing good.
Right. Yeah. I've had days like that. I just found out that our kids are not going back to school this year. At least not to start, maybe not for the whole year. So it's all going to be virtual. And we found out pretty quick that we're not good homeschool parents at all. Every time we see a teacher walking on the street back there, we thank them and we bless them and we give them gifts, because we're not them. But why don't we just start with this question for the two of you? I think it's a good one in light of our current situation in the world around us. Obviously, things are smooth. Everybody's at peace with each other. There are no sort of issues or problems in our culture today. Just kidding. You look around and see all of the tense, anxious, angry, scared, just the issues of the pandemic, and people feeling isolated and alone. Churches are scrambling to figure out what does church look like for us and questioning their old systems and paradigms. Obviously, so many different opportunities for mission and serving people, caring for people. So as you look around in sort of the crazy, chaotic, obviously systemic racism as well, and wanting to just really be an advocate for all people, and especially those who have been oppressed. When we think about our Black brothers and sisters and the oppression, and the way that churches and communities are responding to all of that, and then you think about the upcoming election, and obviously we see a pretty divided nation if you look around. So when you think about our current climate and kind of all the crazy stuff going on, what does living dangerously and provocatively in the ways of Jesus look like in this cultural moment? What does it look like?
You want to go first, Quinn?
Sure, I'll take it. Yeah, I think in this time, and I know this has always been the case, but people really feel a sense of entitlement, and especially amongst young people. And so as believers, I think that the main thing that we have to do away with is that sense of entitlement that we feel. And well, I'm speaking as a young person, obviously, but this I think applies for everybody. Also do away with the ego. You have to be willing to lay that aside. Like just drop to a level that's very relational. Be somebody who, like, you don't have any, like, become a person of no reputation. And so, yeah, I think probably like just ditching the ego is a huge thing right now. Probably the most important thing if I had to pick something.
Okay, so let me press into that a little bit. So yeah. I like that. Entitlement, ego. So what does it look like to be a person that doesn't have that sort of entitlement or ego? How do you live in such a way that is radically different, and people have to take notice when it comes to ego, humility? Maybe speak a little bit to that.
The first thing that came to mind when you mentioned that was like Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. And like, what's it mean to be egoless? It's to bow down and wash people's feet, do something that nobody else wants to do. And so, like, any situation, whether it's cleaning up a mess after like an event or something, or whatever you can think of, just being that person who says, hey, like, no matter who's doing it right now, I'm going to be the one who's going to lay aside like what I feel I'm entitled to, or whatever I feel my reputation is as a person, and I'm going to lay that aside, and I'm going to go do what nobody else wants to do right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It sounds like a willingness to die to yourself, to serve other people, even, in a time where everybody has to be right, to be wrong. I mean, what could be more Jesus-like than to say, Jesus, who was without sin, the one who knew no sin became sin. So the one who was right became wrong, so that he could win relationship with us. Exactly. He became the wrong one. The right one became the wrong one. That's really, it's pretty radical, actually, provocative to not have to win, to not have to overpower your enemy, to actually lose and be defeated out of love for other people, to serve your enemy instead of destroy them or out them, right? It's good.
The Cleveland Browns have been doing that for years.
The Cleveland Browns is a logo for humility, right? And losing.
I think along those lines, something that a verse that's been on my mind a lot over the last few months is 1 Timothy 2:2, which talks about living a quiet and peaceable life. And I think that is one of the most provocative things you can do in our culture today, where everyone wants to live a loud and noisy life, drawing, like Quinn said, drawing attention to themselves, their ego. So I think that like quiet and peaceable life is one of the most provocative things you can do, to just do it. Just like stop talking about the need to serve the poor, just go serve the poor. And that's all of Jesus's words all throughout, of like give without letting your left hand know what your right hand is doing. But most churches, like, they post their giving, like, this is how much we gave to missions this month on their social media. Even like, I think of like healing ministries, how opposite that often is, where Jesus would heal someone and say, tell no one. But healing ministries often are, look at this, give to my healing ministry, 10 people were healed. But I think that like living in contrast to that, and in contrast to our culture, is quiet and peaceable. And I think that it doesn't sound exciting to live a quiet and peaceable life, but I think it can be provocative.
Yeah, it doesn't sound on the front end like something you would expect to hear whenever you come onto a webinar on dangerous and provocative lifestyle, be quiet and peaceable. But yeah, I think you'd be set apart if you gathered a group of people, and rather than shouting or having an opinion that had to raise above everybody else's opinion, that you were someone who was a listener.
Yeah.
That you were someone that was asking questions, right? That the people that came around your table felt like, not that you were amazing, but that you cared about them. They got a real sense that I've never felt so loved than when I came around this table. That is provocative. That's like, in a world where everyone shouts, the quiet person, right?
Yeah, the quiet person ends up with the loudest voice, because it's the only voice that stands out.
Yeah, no, that's really good.
I also think another thing I was thinking about is confession. I think is another like very provocative way to live in our culture, because it's kind of counter what you would expect for like dangerous living, but it is risky to confess. It's risky to go to someone and bring vulnerability, or be vulnerable. But I think it is something that stands in contrast to our culture, like such an important spiritual practice that stands in contrast.
I love that, and I feel that we have to create those cultures. People will only be as authentic as you are. They'll only open up as much as you do. And if you say we can all be real and honest around here, but then you guard yourself, they're not going to feel a freedom to open up. But we should be the chief confessors, and confession is disarming. And if you just start admitting your own brokenness and struggle and inability and your issues, and people see that this person is free. I can be free here too. I don't have to pretend that I'm impressive. I can be free. It's good news. Yeah. We did talk about that a bit when the four of us, you guys, Jeff, and I were on a call together about, confession and authenticity. Right? So you see, confession and authenticity is a huge thing when you think about the next generation and living provocatively in that generation.
Quinn, what do you think?
Oh, was that a question, or were you stating that we talked about it?
Well, the question is, do you see that as a big issue for the next generation, is that we create cultures of authenticity? Because it seems to me, based on the conversations we had, your generation really desires authenticity, and yet I think you guys were saying that there's a lot of fake and hiding. They say they want authenticity, and they can sniff out when you're not being authentic, but they also don't feel safe to be authentic themselves. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I really think that you really hit the nail on the head when you said that other people aren't going to be like as vulnerable or confess if we're not also confessing or being vulnerable as the people who are leading the group that we're walking with. And yeah, I don't know what else I could add to that. You just hit the nail on the head with that.
I think that's like kids who grow up on social media grow up discerning between which friends are fake and which friends are real, which friends are posting things that are real and which friends are posting things that are fake. And so I think this next generation has like an innate discernment built in to just how they live, how they operate, and they can read through fake so fast. And so I think it almost for the church and for believers, like we won't something that I keep thinking is like everything that's hidden in the church will be revealed, because the young people are going to see through it. Young people are gonna see right through the facades, and because they're used to that. That's their habit. That's how they've grown up, having to see through that on social media for everyone else.
Interesting. So a real culture of, I think, feeling critical. You said entitled, critical, but also desiring authenticity and something deeper, right? Almost more prophetic voices in this next generation.
Mm.
Which is why I think voices like you guys. So when you think about our current church culture, and I don't hear many people saying that the church people, the Christians in America, or even around the globe, for the most part, in some places for sure, but in a lot of places not so much. Definitely not so much in Europe. Definitely not so much in America for the most part. They wouldn't say that we're dangerous. They wouldn't say that we're exciting, that the movement of Jesus is adventurous and daring. I hear words like boring, stale, dead, lifeless, predictable, right? Routine, all that kind of stuff. So how important is danger, adventure, risk, and provocative truth for the next generation?
You want to start us off, Brandon?
Sure. Yeah, I think like I'm coming off staff as a kids pastor, and I've been volunteering in the kids minute, or I'd started as a volunteer. So I've spent 17 years watching these kids grow up here. And I watch like consistently kids grow up, have a passion for Jesus, have a passion for even a desire to do ministry. And then they graduate and they end up walking away from often the church and often their faith as well. And a common thing, I think, I think there's many common factors, but one of the common factors I think there is with that is they don't have a compelling vision for their life. Like no one ever cast a vision that's actually compelling to live the Christian life. In fact, it sounds really boring. Like the vision that's cast for them is like, once you get out of high school, now you attend on Sundays in a room full of people who are way older than you, and you give 10% of your income and you might serve. And that's just not like, there's nothing compelling about that. So I think when you call a young person to give, and I think it's why a lot of like YWAM is successful. Like these missionary organizations are successful in calling out young people to take more radical risks, is because there is something compelling when you say, no, I want everything, but it doesn't just take calling them to give everything. I think will jump into it when they see the leader also giving everything. I have grown up in the Foursquare movement, which was started by Sister Amy Semple McPherson. And I think that was one of the compelling things at the beginning of the movement, was they would literally send out missionaries to another country, and the missionary knows no one in the other country, has no plan of what they're going to do when they get there. There's like nothing in place, but they were just called to give their life to Jesus, everything, all of it. And they'd go and they'd make churches or build churches, and movements would happen in other nations. But they also, it was like led by someone who, like, she was all in. And so I think sometimes young adults are called to be all in by leaders who aren't, or just not called to much at all. Yeah.
Yeah. If I can just build off of that, I think when I think of a provocative Christian, it's somebody who, just by the way that they live their life, they like triggers something in people, and people begin, and I say this from personal experience, like from my high school career, when I got saved my sophomore year, I began to be provoked by the people who were around me. We would go to the mall, and all my friends who were seeing healings happen left and right, they would just walk up to somebody who was in a cast or something, and they'd say, "Hey, like, do you mind if we pray for you? We believe that we have a God who heals." And they'd go for it. And that was provoking something in me too. And so I'm like, man, like, if they can do this, why don't I do this too? And so that was huge for me. That was like the most provoking thing that I've ever experienced. But apart from that, I have to say, loving well, loving in abundance, is like probably the most provocative thing that a Christian can do. And just like laying down your life, like I was talking about before, becoming a humble servant. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and I love that, loving well, loving in abundance.
Yeah.
Brandon, I'm going to circle back to something you said about, when people come to faith in Jesus, or people grew up in the church, they feel like the next step is that they would attend weekly this large group gathering, give a little bit of money to something, maybe attend a small group or a Bible study or something like that, and they don't feel like the passions of their heart are stirred up. They don't feel like there's a compelling vision of what could be, or what God might be calling them to do, or to change, or to shape. They don't understand mission or the kingdom well. And so my question would be, what do you see the Spirit of God doing for the future? This is to both of you, in terms of how might the Spirit be provoking new forms of church, community, mission, right? Because none of us would say, Jesus died on a cross, came back from the dead, walked the earth for 40 days with a group of people, and then sent them off to buy a plot of land, build a building, and then assemble people on one day a week for 1 hour a week. Like, none of us would say that was the great vision that Jesus had for our lives. You see the early church meeting house to house, and breaking bread, and selling property to meet needs. So what do you envision as you think about the future, this provocative way of living as servants and loving people radically? What types of expressions of church do you envision? What gets stirred up in your heart?
It's a good question. I think movements that have that innately produce authenticity, or push towards that. I think a big piece for my generation will be knowing that the person leading has nothing to gain from it. So personally, I'm I plan to be bivocational, because I know that's they've seen so much financial brokenness in organizations or within the church that I know that's for well, for like older generations, giving to a religious institution was just a given. For my generation, that is like almost a negative. And so they're willing to be generous, but I think that generosity looks different. And that was my first thought. Any thoughts, Quinn?
Yeah. I really just picture like the Acts 2 kind of church, or really all through Acts kind of church, where it's like just a gathering where there's not necessarily even a clear leader, but rather it's just like an open discussion, and people like feel like they can be friends with each other rather than have somebody who's up here versus a bunch of people who are down here. This being the pastor, and then this being like the rest of the people. And I think that that's so key. Like being like as a whole, being incarnational with people, being as relational as you can possibly be. And no matter what position you have, just really like being willing to stoop down and be like, hey, look, I'm no different than you are. We're all in this together, and I'm going to walk with you through this. And yeah, that's what I envision.
Yeah, so when you said no clear leader, a lot of people that know me in Creo know my big push about we should be calling people servants, not leaders. We should be running to the bottom, not the top, empowering people from underneath, not overlording from up here. Whenever Jesus talked about leadership, he redefined it as servant repeatedly. So I wonder if, sort of dream with me here, respond to this if you like. I wonder if maybe in the future God is calling us back to something that's more the priesthood of all believers. Less of a clergy laity divide, more of every believer filled with the same Holy Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, empowered and equipped in various giftings, and just giving different people permission. Yeah, you're a teacher. Yeah, you're a prophet. Yeah, you're an evangelist. We need you. We need to defer to you on this. We need your help. You need to lead us in this area where you're strong. Do you envision a type of gathering or community of people where there's less of one person at the top and more of everyone operating in their primary giftings and learning from each other?
Yeah, I definitely, as you were saying that, I was just thinking about how, like, do we really think that we learn the most from hearing what's almost like a lecture from somebody, or do we learn the most from being in a more discussional environment where we're just shooting ideas back and forth, we're just talking things out, we're not hearing all from one perspective? And I really think that the answer to that is we learn way more from doing the latter, from having open discussions. Yeah, Brandon.
Yeah, I think, so it's interesting. It's like we're not even going back, or we're not going to something new. We're going back to what was a little bit more. So I think that priesthood of all believers is a huge thing, especially for in the process of, in America, I feel like half of our work is a small portion of our work is evangelism. Almost a bigger portion of what needs to be done is like a calling back to the church of people who have faith, who have some form of like spiritual interest, but has been disenfranchised, disillusioned, doesn't like the churches they're seeing. And I think a lot of those people are often people who've never found a place to contribute in the church, who never had those opportunities. A lot of my friends who've left the church as young adults are people who were dismissed by the church for whatever reason, but they have substantial things to contribute. I think it's something I really appreciate about like the house church just movement across the nation is the emphasis on the priesthood, on the fivefold gifts. I think that's a huge important thing to keep present, because in the conversation. And I even think of I think less, and this is for a lot of people will be difficult for them in the church as a whole, is like the letting go of titles, of like the church automatically calls Paul Apostle Paul when it's always written Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ. It wasn't like a title, it was describing his role, the way he was functioning. But we've like automatically given him, or Jesus says like, why you call me teacher, teacher, if you have one teacher, or rabbi, rabbi, for you have one rabbi, or and father, father, I think, or something like that. You can look it up. Yeah, so I think that is a huge piece. And as a young person growing up in the church, you read this in scripture and then you see it not lived out in leadership structures. And so I think what like Quinn is saying of, yeah, like they're not even the like absence of leadership, but leadership purely based on relationship. Like, I'm going to go to you to lead me because I trust you and have a relationship with you and I'm inviting that in. Not you're going to lead me because if you don't, you'll remove my licensing as a pastor. You know, like the ways that our culture practices leadership.
That's where you get that lovely quote of, it's hard to get people to understand something when their salary depends on them not understanding it. And so if we truly, Quinn, I'm going to back you up here. My neighbor started his mower. Perfect timing, right? I'm going to back you up here with this image that I'll share. You guys see it? This is average retention rates. So Quinn asked, I don't know that we learn better from one person lecturing up front, but maybe a community of people dialoguing, discussing together. This actually is proof that you're right, Quinn. But yeah, what you thought is true. 50% retention rate if people discuss it together. 75% retention rate if you practice it together as a community. 90% if you teach other people. 5% retention rate if it's a lecture. And yet we've built our entire paradigm in Christendom around sitting people in rows and lecturing to those people. So yeah, I think what you're talking about with a community of people discussing together, practicing together, teaching the things that they're learning together is, I see God all over that for sure.
Mm.
Let me ask you guys this. How do you embed risk-taking, adventure, danger into your culture? You're starting something new. You want to kind of create a culture of living provocatively for Jesus, taking risk. How do you not just do that yourself, but how do you create or embed that into a culture? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with one person. It can start with me, it can start with you. And yeah, it starts with one person, and it's like a domino effect. As soon as one person does it, somebody else is going to do it, and then another person is going to pick up on it, and then another person, and so on, and so forth. So yeah, like going back to my personal example, back in high school when I was seeing people get healed, and I was like, man, if my friends are doing this and it's the same spirit that lives in me that lives in them, why can't I do this? And so as soon as I got my license when I was in high school, I was like, I'm headed to the mall. I'm going to go talk to people about Jesus. I'm going to go pray for people, see what the Lord speaks to me, like about their life, or see if the Lord wants to show up in any specific way. And so, yeah, that was an example from my personal life where I was just like, man, I see these people doing it. Why can't I do it too? And so that just goes to show that as soon as one person takes action, one person takes that first step of faith, there's going to be a whole domino effect that comes after that.
Yeah, I love that. I think the key to what you're saying there is demonstration in community. You see other people doing it. It's more caught than taught.
Yeah.
And you get so much in Bible college or a church setting where they tell you to go live this dangerous way for Jesus, but you've never seen it. You see it with a group of people and you go, I could do that. I could do that. So you think a lot of creating the culture is people have to experience it with you before they understand how it can be done. You say,
Sure.
watch me, watch what I do it with me. Now you can do it without me. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's like discipleship, right? Like that is discipleship. I think is the way. Risk taking is a part of discipleship. Of if they see those who are discipling taking those risks. I think like Mike. I think last on a coaching call last week, I think you mentioned like when you start a new micro church, you like set the expectation that this is like temporary. This at some point this is not permanent. And I think that like setting that expectation in whatever culture you're building of like, this is an experiment, there's going to be failures. I think putting to words those expectations, like we're going to try things and it's not going to work. Even what you and Jeff are doing here with Creo, I think you set the expectations well that like we're creating things and some of it won't work. I think that helps give people the freedom to be okay with failure, to be okay with things not working out as they expected. And then, yeah, what Quinn said of it's seeing people practice risk taking helps others take risks. Even as I've come off staff at our church, I've had countless conversations with people who that risk is stirring up things in their hearts of risks that they know that they need to be taking. And just hearing the story of someone taking a risk is stirring up risks that they want to take.
Yeah, I think stories are really important for sure. I think we need to get comfortable telling a lot of stories of things that are not working. You know, we tried this thing and tried to gather some people and nobody showed up. Or we got some people together and I wanted to talk about spiritual things, but everyone was talking. There was so much chaos. We didn't even get into some of the deeper things that we wanted to talk about. Like we need to share these stories of I tried this and it didn't work. We need more of that, right? It's culture of experimentation and learning, and we don't need to always pretend like everything works and it works the first time. It doesn't. And I think that actually knocks so many people out of the game. They hear only stories of success. They go out and try something and it doesn't work and they go, I can't do this. Instead of understanding that there were 50 things that were attempted before something worked. And so it's okay. Keep trying and experimenting and doing new things. Very, very important. Tim Monahan made a statement that I think is worth mentioning. It takes slower than people think. Like it doesn't happen as quick as people think it will. So go ahead. I got a mower. Speak into that.
I agree. It does. It's actually part of like, there's people I had hoped in my process of coming off staff that I had hoped would be stirred up in ways from me coming out into this. And they aren't. And there's so much for someone that someone has to lose too, to embrace risk. And there's security and comfort is so deeply embedded there's a long ways to go. For me, it took the process of taking that risk took 2.5 years. And I think it can take other people just as long or longer to actually come to the place of like, I'm ready to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I just one thing popped into my head when you were talking, and that's that even in failure, there's still going to be growth. And you can view a failure as a success in a way, because in the end, you're gonna, like, after you fail, you know exactly what you need to change about what you were doing, and you fix that, and you're on the right track. So I think that even failures can be viewed as a success.
yeah, absolutely. If you think of it as we're always learning, and your identity isn't tied to your performance. So how do we keep learning and figuring out how to better experience God, how to better step into the places and the people that are broken as a presence of good news, right? How do we continue to learn on this journey? And also, we should be trying things and then ending them because they didn't work. That didn't work. It was a failed experiment. We'll try something else here. A lot more of that. But Tim said, sometimes discipleship downright sucks, but the risk is still worth it. How do you cope when you risk and fail? And I think a lot of it is for me, it's been a mindset shift of seeing myself as always tinkering. Like nothing is ever completed. It's something I love about this because I'm always sort of playing with it and turning things around and switching things and making adjustments. But at the same time, there's something very frustrating about there's never a completion. It's not like we've figured out disciple making or mission. You're always on it, right? You're always adjusting and changing things. And, as soon as one thing starts to get better, something else starts to regress. So now you got to pay attention here and build this back up. And then this goes down or another issue pops up. And so you're always sort of tinkering with how do we help people be formed into Christ likeness, understand their gifting, transform their world around them. You never arrive, right? You never arrive. So if you feel like I'm either winning or losing, right, I think that's a wrong mindset to begin with. So I had another question about being provocative. When is it a good thing? When's it a bad thing? Should we aim for being provocative?
I think a quote that has stuck with me for a long time. I had lunch one time with a guy named Mark Scandrett. He wrote a book called Practicing the Way of Jesus. And he said this, and it like got stuck in my head and it's radical risk requires radical stability. And so I always think of that, like when I share that quote with friends, it's normally in the context of like a friend who wants to become a missionary, but then they're going to go to a bachelor's program, get on $60,000 of debt, and then they want to go to seminary and take on another $40,000 of debt. Where I'm like, actually, like you aren't going to have the stability to take the risk of being a missionary at the end of that. Like you're going to have to go get a corporate job and get some good pay for a while before you can go out in the missions field. And so, so I hold that close, even in the risks that I'm taking now. Like there's a stability that I have in taking the risk. And I don't know. Yeah. So I think there's like a sensitive tension because I think radical risk can also be foolishness if it's risk without any thought, any stability in that.
What do you think, Quinn?
Yeah, I want to be careful with how I say this one or how I word it, but I think that one of the best times to be provocative with our lifestyle, the way that we live as a Christian, is with those who are still caught in religion. People who are just like going about living like the like lukewarm Christian life, if you want to say that, just going to church, maybe reading their Bible once or twice a week, not seeking to do the works of Jesus. And I think that when we live provocatively as believers in front of these, I'll use the word lukewarm again, lukewarm believers, I think that that's great, because something will be stirred up in them and something will be triggered in them, and they'll be like, wow, like that's how a Christian should be living. That's how I should be living my life. And conviction hits people's hearts because you're modeling the life of Jesus with how you live your life. And people who are just going about like boring Christianity, if you want to say that, it really stirs something up in them. So I think that's when it's a good time to be provocative.
I'm going to go back to something that you said earlier, Quinn, is you talked about loving, like there's this just like unlimited love that you have for people, right?
Mm.
Just want to love people like crazy.
Sure.
I think when I think about being provocative, I think if you want to be provocative for the sake of being provocative, it usually comes from a place of, needing to feel cool,
Mm-hmm.
or like I'm doing something unique. It's like an ego booster or something.
Yeah.
But if you start with love, then love will lead you to do things that are provocative.
Mm-hmm.
Love will lead you to embrace people and go places that you never thought you would go, knock on doors that you never thought you would knock on, to show up at places. My wife never thought she'd be knocking on the door of a drug house, right? But you do that because your friend's in there. Mm-hmm. And when you love people, you do crazy things because love demands it at times. And so I think if we start with love, it will force us to at times live provocatively if we follow that. Whereas if we start with just wanting to be provocative, we can get off course, I think.
Yeah. And that's something that I jotted down when I was just preparing to meet with you guys today. It's that when I think when we talk about being provocative, we're not talking about being provocative as in like getting under people's skin. We're talking about being provocative in a way that, just like as a byproduct of Christ in us, we live this provocative lifestyle. Like the healer lives in me, the restorer lives in me, and like Jesus himself lives in us. And so just as a byproduct of Jesus living in us, a provocative lifestyle should be the result. And that doesn't mean deliberately being like, oh, like I'm going to try to get under this person's skin today, like to try to like provoke them to live this same lifestyle that I'm living. That's not what that means. And yeah, I just wanted to mention that because I jotted that down when I was preparing today.
Yeah, it's more the overflow of being connected to the vine, and the fruit that comes out is provocative, right? Mm-hmm. If you start with the root of being connected to Christ, well, Christ lived a life that provoked a lot of people. Yeah. And if we're to follow Jesus, we will also frustrate, agitate, challenge, move people toward a different way, and get people talking quite a bit, for sure. And people will ask about the hope that lies within us because of the wildly different life that we live and the people that we love and the way we respond to trials and hardship. And like you guys said earlier, right? Just the peaceable, like Brandon said earlier, the peaceable, quiet life of humility itself causes people to go, why aren't you shouting? Why don't you stand up for this or do this or whatever? Yeah. But man, I just trying to make tacos for you because I love you. That's good. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that, Brandon?
No, I loved the, Judy captured it from the conversation going on in the chat too, of she wrote genuine faith is provocative, trying to be, and from what Quinn was saying as well, trying to be provocative is ugly. And that's exactly, I think it is. Yeah, I don't think being provocative takes effort that much effort. It's genuine faith, love, like you guys were saying, is when that's the focus, we will innately be provocative to people who are not that. I'm even finding right now within our church, I'm finding that in some people perceive my decision as a threat, and or responding to it like it's a threat. It's because it is threatening. Being risky is threatening to people who are really comfortable. And so I think it just innately, I'm not trying to be threatening. I'm trying to be loving and gracious in the process. But I think it is threatening to people who are living comfortable lives.
So final question, and then I'll open it up for anyone who wants to stick around and ask a few questions. But my final one is, are there certain habits or rhythms that keep you taking risk?
I wouldn't say that there's any habits or whatever that keep me taking risks. I think we probably briefly touched on this, but I would say that just like the result of taking risks and being willing to step out in faith and trust the Lord in what we're doing, I think when we do that and we see the results, that's what drives us to like keep going. Like I see this happen, I'm like, man, like I got to take another risk. Like if I saw results in this, then maybe I'll see results in this. And even if it doesn't work out, you still have that hope because you've seen before, like, God, I've seen you do this. Now I'm going to trust you for this, and I'm going to take another risk. So yeah.
What'd you say, Brandon?
I think for me, I am not innately, like I'm not by nature a risk taker. So like I don't think I wake up in the morning going like, what risk could I take today? Which I think is probably true for all of us to some degree, is that we're all bend towards stability. So I think like I have to like, I think spiritual practices, a variety of spiritual practices are the only way I can take a risk through it. So I think like spiritual practice I've been leaning into is fasting. And I couldn't get myself to actually go have the conversation about my resignation. And so I finally fasted for 3 days. And after those 3 days, I had the courage to go have that conversation and step down. And so I think there was like almost like a spiritual strength that had to be mustered in order to have that conversation. And so I think having a healthy like life of which I wish I fasted more regularly, and I hope to have a more engaged prayer life where I think all of that will contribute. Like if I'm really studying God's word, really living out who Jesus was, and trying to put that into practice in my life, I will innately be a risk taker. And so I think if I'm engaged in God's word, trying to put spiritual practices in place as regular rhythms in my life, then I will be a risk taker. There's no way to do that and live comfortably.
Yeah, that's really good. I think the having certain, I think you said habits or rhythms. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Certain rhythms that you put into place. Yeah, I think some of the rhythms that we put into place are really significant. Like if we stretch ourselves to eat with someone who is not a part of our faith community each week, or you just make it a rhythm. It's something you talk about. Who am I sharing the table with? Are they just people a part of our life or community, or people outside? And you just make it a rhythm. It's something you do, right? Or are we taking care of needs and blessing people? Something you do. Sometimes you got to kind of break out of old ways of thinking. I think it was Lynn Sweet that turned me on to the idea of forced randomization. Which, have you guys ever heard of forced randomization? The idea is if you're going to go on a flight, you say, give me 4 random magazines. Could be about guns, gardening, and sports, whatever. And you get on and kind of peruse those magazines. It gets you thinking about things that you wouldn't normally think about. You are going to go out to the movies. You say 2 tickets to the next show. No idea what it's going to be. You go out to eat. Surprise me. But the idea is, how many experiences do we miss out on because you always get the bacon cheeseburger? And so you're learning to train your mind to step out of the typical ways of thinking, stretch yourself to think differently, try new things, develop different habits, look at the world in a different way, sort of have soft eyes to see the world around us. It's good.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Quinn.
Oh, I was just gonna say I put something on my Facebook last night. I posted a good amount on Facebook. But I'm gonna read it. I said I could choose to live comfortably and not be fruitful, or I could choose to live like a disciple and start being okay with discomfort for the advancement of the kingdom. And that came to mind as I was preparing, and I was like, man, like that's so true.
Absolutely. Hey, I am so glad that we have you guys a part of what we're doing here. You guys are actually very significant to helping build whatever's going to come out of Creo. And the future excites me with people like the two of you. So really appreciate you and the emphasis that you're going to put into leading us with this next generation of young leaders. So I just thank you for this time. We'll also open up some Q&A in a minute, but Jeff Pankratz wanted to share a little plug for something. So go ahead.
Yeah, as we wrap up, guys, and we want to get this out to our listeners and our YouTube channel as well. But so Rick's on the call here. Rick and I are just putting out a little opportunity to join, kind of like what we're talking about today, a learning community to kind of explore these roads of the kind of the first century church into the first 300 years of the church, and how they lived this out together, and really how the whole thing went boom together. So I'm just going to share this real quick. Take 30 seconds of your time. Thank you for sticking around, just looking at this real quick. It's called Essentials, History of the Gospel and Gospel Living. It's going to be every other Monday night, starting September 21st. There's a reg link I'll send you guys out. But the objective really is just that box there on the left, is to rediscover and reignite the core gospel and gospel living essentials that led to the first Jesus movement. So you can see here on the units, we'll talk about the apostolic deposit of our faith through Jesus and the first followers of Jesus, the creeds, confessions, church mothers and fathers, and then how do we get back to those essentials in our lives today. So I'll stop sharing now, but I'm just excited about it. I'd love for any of you guys to invite friends to go back to the kind of life of the first few hundred years of the church and break out some cool stories from their lives, and obviously the scriptures as well. But Rick was in our last learning community. Rick, would you mind unmuting yourself and just sharing a bit about the value for you and your team down there in South Carolina? You can unmute yourself there, bro.
All right. Hey, Jeff. Listen, what we do here in Anderson is a little different than what the other churches around us are doing. And simply because we're not traditional. This is why I find such great brotherhood and commonality with you guys. But through the years, what we've discovered is sometimes we have a tendency to fall into a place of isolation because what we do and how we think is so different from the folks around us. So when I consider the value of our church, and we had quite a few folks who joined us in this learning community over the last few months, as much as the content was greatly valuable, the relationships that were formed around the country and sometimes around the world were invaluable. You know, which sometimes our people, they look to me and they think, oh, Rick, he's got these great ideas. Some of them may not be so great, but sometimes they have a tendency to think that it's just us, that it's just our little group of people. When they began to get on a call, like they began to see people all over the country who are seeking to live out the gospel the way we are. I mean, it just really solidified their faith, solidified their mission, and we're even now working to solidify our identity as a body of Christ. So, and as a missional movement here. So I can't say enough about the value. If you have people in your missional communities or church who are needing to plug in with people around the country, and just more and more believers who think the way you think, there's no greater opportunity than this. So I can't recommend it enough, and would love for you guys to join us as we move forward.
That's quite the plug. That's more than I asked for. Thanks, Rick. Mike, did you want to have some Q&A time now with the guys here?
Yeah, I'll open it up if anyone has some questions for Brandon
Perfect.
and Quinn.
My ebook on how to resign at your church is coming soon.
Nice.
Brandon, I had a question for Brandon. I think you mentioned at the beginning what you're going to do next, but I can't remember what you said.
Yeah, I'm looking at doing like house church movement. There's already some things going on in our city in that regard. Jason Lee, who's on these calls sometimes, has our couple house church network out here. But then, yeah, so I'm looking at starting a house church movement. I'm also looking at, I've done ministry in an apartment complex for like 5 years. It's like growing up, it was the part of our city that everyone told me to avoid. It was like, oh, that's Jake's way. We don't go over there. And so when I became pastor, I was like, I'm going to go over there. But so I'm looking at trying to get an apartment over in that complex, because I was like, I want to plant house churches in that community. So if that works out to get an apartment over there, unfortunately, when you're unemployed, that creates some complications. I'm still working on getting a job post this. So, but yeah, so that's kind of what I'm looking at doing.
Any other questions for these guys?
I'll go ahead and ask one because, I guess the thought on my mind is I'm just taking a guess that you guys would be younger than me because I know how my body feels in the morning, but how can we continue to support younger dudes like yourself and younger dudettes so that we can continue to equip those underwords? Because I mean, like, you guys are still in that area. Like, I would still consider myself Gen Z, even though I'm like not Gen Z, and it just happens to work that way. But I want to know, how can we support you, and how can we come alongside that as a older person, so to say, not to mean by age.
Yeah. Oh man, I think the biggest thing that anybody who's older than the two of us can do, and I think Mike and Jeff, you guys do a great job of this. I know that, but I think the biggest thing that we need is somebody who's going to hear us out, hear what we have to say, hear our ideas, someone who's going to brainstorm with us, someone who's going to support us. And so really that's what we need. I think somebody who's going to be very incarnational. That's the word that we use a lot, I think. But somebody who's like going to be there, who's going to say like, hey, I want to walk with you. I know Mike has done that for me personally. But yeah, I think that's really the biggest thing for us, is having somebody that we can go to. Yeah.
I'd second that. Of like, I told Mike and Jeff this, of like, no, like having Creo Collective, even one of the biggest fears of jumping out of anything is that you're going to jump out and be completely alone. And so I think having like a group like Creo Collective, where it's like, okay, I'm not crazy. Also, because if for young people who are coming out of the church, there's like a lot of feelings. I was actually just talking with two families last night, and we were all talking about how there's a lot of feelings of like betrayal, like I'm betraying the church, and am I wrong? Like, is there something wrong with me? And those kind of feelings. So it's really reaffirming to jump out into a community. So if there was one thing that could be done, it was the thing I was like, I'm happy to see now, but wish I'd known earlier, was that there are so many resources available and so many books on house church movements and cell church movements and simple church movements. There's so many resources out there that I'd never had heard about. And so if there was a way for us to almost be noisier in church culture, like in church leadership culture, of like, there is this stuff going on. Cause I think there's a lot of people. Actually, I'm having coffee with a youth pastor at a mega church out here on Friday who said him and his wife are looking at, they saw my post and they're like, we were praying about doing house church, but we didn't know where to go and look and start. And it's like, I can get you connected now. But yeah, so I think there's those kind of, if people could know of the resources more, which I think involves all of us sharing the posts when Jeff Facebook messages us and tells us to share the posts.
Hey, Brandon, I just want to affirm that don't let people make you feel bad about what you're doing and where the Spirit's taking you. I think we should question the system. We should question our own system. We should always question the system and critique it, but not the people, right? You're not attacking the people. You're thinking about the system, what works, what doesn't work. I love Brian Sanders' analogy of a car guy, right? A really great car guy is a guy that takes a car apart and says, oh, I don't need this piece, I don't need this one. Oh, I'm gonna add this, I'm gonna change this, I'm gonna make this better. A really great car guy, takes a car apart. A really great church guy takes the church apart, the system apart, and thinks about what's essential. What does the Spirit want to do? How should we think differently? What should we change? What should we keep? How do we make this car run as good as it can possibly run? And that's a person who really loves the church, right? So you love the church when you critique the system. You love it. Just make sure that the people get the sense that you're not attacking who they are. And part of the problem for a lot of people is their identity is attached to their job, right? And so they should be able to sit around like we are right now and talk like offensive coordinators that are discussing how we can make our offense better and score touchdowns, right? But instead, if you talk about their system and how they run their offense, they take it as a shot against who they are because their identity is in the wrong place. And we should always be tinkering with our systems, always tinkering with our systems. Don't let them make you feel bad about that. You tinker with your own system and question theirs, but let them know that you love them. And it's a good thing. Don't feel bad about that. I spent too much time feeling bad about that in the past. It's okay.
Thank you. That's good, and it's good.
Well, thank you for the time, guys. Really appreciate it. It was good to hang out. Great to hear your hearts.
A lot of fun.
Thanks, fellas.
A lot of gold in there. I could see at about the 35-minute mark, people were getting pretty pumped. That was good. All right. We'll catch you guys later.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, Evan, stick around.